Welcome back to the Friday WP-Tonic Roundtable. I am Kim Shivler playing Jonathan Denwood today, if you see my name listed in our Zoom. It's episode 274 of WP-Tonic, and I'm going to let this great team introduce themselves. Sallie, I'm starting with you.
All right. My name is Sallie Goestch. I am a WordPress consultant and develop themes on the Genesis framework, and I'm the organizer of the East Bay WordPress meetup in Oakland, California.
Excellent. Chris?
My name is Chris Badgett. I'm the co-founder of Lifter LMS, which is a plugin for creating and selling online courses and making membership sites. I'm also extremely obsessed with course creation and membership sites in general, and I run a podcast on that topic called LMS Cast.
Thank you. Mendel, welcome back.
Hey, thanks a lot. It's good to be back. I'm Mendel. I work at GoDaddy and do community stuff and bring the community's ideas and thoughts back to our organization to make positive change in our company. I also, by the way, just want to let you know that I just got an email from Alexa telling me that Alexa can now help you rap or something like that. So yeah, I think you probably need to consult Alexa, John. Anyway, oh, burn. Sorry. Okay, I'm done. That was a long intro.
And John Locke.
I'm John Locke, and I do SEO for manufacturing firms. There you go.
All right. So maybe sometime we'll have to talk about Alexa's boombox help or whatever she does. I've heard she cackles. I've heard this weird thing about the laughing. Have you heard that?
I've heard it. I mean, I don't have an Amazon Echo, so I have not witnessed it happening, but I have seen news items about it.
I've seen news items about it. I don't have those kind of things, but I've seen news items about it. I will say I have a smart house that's an older smart house. My friend built this house, and it was the smart house of the 14 years ago version. And the automatic lights, that are triggered to where you could plug in and do it from your phone and all. Sometimes if there's a power surge, they come on in the middle of the night whenever they wish. And that's kind of interesting when you're like laying in bed and the kitchen light goes on. You're like, oh my God.
Yes, that could be a little alarming.
Yes, exactly. But I hear they don't do that anymore. All right, let's get right to our news stories for the day. And we're going to start with let's see, did I just find it? With how will Gutenberg affect the enterprise? We are going to talk about Gutenberg some today, the enterprise, and then the themes and the discussion around the themes. So John Locke, start us off with your thoughts on this article, please.
Well, definitely. For those who have been living underneath a rock, Gutenberg is the new editing experience that's going to get rolled into WordPress 5.0 at some indeterminate date. And the agency Crowd Favorite, who deals with a lot of enterprise clients, they wrote this article, and a lot of it basically says to me, like the big underlying theme that I got out of this article is enterprise companies, they don't like risk. They move slowly, especially when it comes to digital things, because risk aversion is the primary importance. With Gutenberg, we're all kind of in the same boat. We kind of have a general idea of what it's going to be when it's a finished product, but this next iteration is basically going to be a beta of where they want the editing experience to go. The big message that Karim was saying, Karim Marucci, the leader of Crowd Favorite here, is that this is a planning problem, not necessarily a technical one. So any organization that has a site that's built on WordPress needs to be aware of Gutenberg. And then also any agencies, consultants, or even internal teams that are working with it, they need to have a kind of a plan of making sure that everything is going to function correctly once the switch gets flipped. The big thing, the big iteration statement here is basically making sure that there's a plan in place, making sure that somebody's on top of this, and making sure that, you know, when this gets rolled into WordPress, that nothing goes sideways. And there's one line in here too that stuck out to me, and I can't remember it word for word, but you know, basically, if you've already built your site on WordPress, and a lot of us use WordPress as well to build sites, this is something that we all kind of have to deal with together. But technology changes, so it's always changing, so it's normal.
Thank you. Well, also, you mentioned that it interests me that, you know, it's the planning issue. I think a lot of times in our community, we get wrapped up in the technical issues and we forget that businesses really care about solving a business problem. They don't actually care about what we're digging into technically. They want it to work. So we need to make sure we're planning, et cetera, to make sure it works for them, because that's just not what they dig out on, especially if you're talking to a C-level executive in an enterprise. They really don't care about our technology that much as it may hurt our feelings. Mendel, your thoughts on this article?
Oh, I've got an opinion. Listen, I'm gonna give the non-PC version of Kareem's article or response. And this is gonna be messed up, but and I'm sorry. Gutenberg isn't a big deal. It's not. It's a change to a piece of software that you get more billable hours for teaching your clients about. It's something that is changing to make a piece of software presumably better. If it succeeds, the platform will continue to be stable. You'll continue to be able to retain client work, probably better client work, selling Gutenberg as a benefit rather than something scarier, a big change. Right? So I think we're looking at this in the wrong way. I've heard a lot of discussions at WordCamps and online and podcasts and Facebook groups and all that stuff about how Gutenberg is like Armageddon for web agencies, and it's just I know, you know, maybe somebody will watch this and blast me for this, but I just don't think it's true. Like, yeah, it's a pain in the ass to change things. I get it, but it's really frustrating. You know, when you're a part of an open source community and people are rowing in different directions. Like maybe it succeeds, maybe it fails. If it fails, was it you, John, that said you need to have a contingency, or you need to know, you know, what's out there beyond WordPress? That should be something that everybody's doing. You know, I have a side hustle that runs on WordPress. I also know that if WordPress and WooCommerce doesn't work well, that there are other options out there as well. I'm not even 1% closer to looking for seriously considering a new option because of Gutenberg, and the days when I used to run my own small agency. I every single time there was a software update and WordPress was iterating quickly then, and new features were coming and new UX changes and new UI changes and all that stuff. If you remember those days when WordPress was iterating quickly, like every single time something new came out, I went back into my client and I said, listen, I'll train you on how to do that. This is going to be $125 an hour or something like that. Oh, and by the way, this is an awesome new feature that you're going to be excited about, right? And it's I think it's about reframing how we think about this in the enterprise. It's no different. Like this is a benefit in my opinion.
I actually think in the enterprise, it's probably going to be easier in some way because enterprises are accustomed to basically, having their agency of record or their on-staff people to maintain things on an ongoing basis and invest in them. And the resistance is more likely to come from the small clients who do more things themselves and who have trouble kind of, figuring out why they should pay more money to basically keep something, to keep something from breaking. And so I think what Mendel said about selling it as a benefit is important to the degree it's possible. I mean, I definitely think that I have clients who will be happy about being able to build pages out of blocks. And I have other clients who don't interact with the WordPress interface themselves as much. Maybe they have an assistant who does it. Maybe they ask me to do it. So it won't affect them directly so much as long as nothing on their site breaks. But it does mean that to them, it feels like what they're doing is paying money to keep something working the same.
Yeah, and sorry, just in response to that, I know we want to get to Chris too, but in response to that, yes, it's true. You pay money to keep something working. I don't know how many times it took me working with clients, telling them that we were upgrading the site, major updates, that we were updating the site, or a plugin changed their flow and broke something on the site. And then I had to go back to the client and I had to say, listen, there's been an upgrade. Your site isn't compatible, and translating how that upgrade and that benefit then benefited them, right? And it was hard for the first few times that I had to go back and say that, because when you approach it from the something broke and they have to pay needlessly to upgrade the experience, that sucks, right? But what I learned to do over time is I learned to go back and say, listen, if we upgrade this plugin, which will give you X, Y, and Z additional capabilities, it's going to cost you X amount of time. Now we can do it without paying that money, but if it breaks, then we're talking emergency fees and things like that, right? And every single time they're like, oh, there is a business benefit to this. I want to do it, right? Or occasionally they would say no, and then a week later they're like, yeah, let's do it, right? And so if we talk about Gutenberg in terms of being a modern editing experience, right? And then we go to our clients and say, hey, listen, I'm going to show you how to use this modern editing experience, and this is how much it's going to cost. I think it's going to be a win. Sallie, you can totally call bullshit too, by the way.
No, I don't think that's bullshit. I think, there may be some clients who aren't convinced, although I think in a lot of cases, the smaller the client, the less customization they have, the less likely anything is to actually break. And it probably won't be that big a deal, or that much involved with it. And maybe in some cases those are not the better clients to have. That you're gonna be happier as a developer working with people who understand the place that their website has in their business, and the fact that, well, there is just ongoing, maintenance required in anything. If you own a car, you have to pay to get the oil changed and the tune-ups and stuff, and your car is not getting new features from that. But if you don't do it, your car will stop working. And so I think, yeah, a lot of it is about framing. It is about, what this part of what this article says is, well, it shouldn't, there's no reason it should be a disaster, but you have to prepare, you have to plan, you have to think about how to roll this out. You have to talk to your clients in advance about, well, okay, well, what have you customized that's likely to be affected? And the fact that if you need to, there is some time where you can keep Gutenberg disabled to give you a chance to catch up on any of those adjustments. It means that it should be possible if you're reasonably good at conducting your business, and that this is our responsibility. And I feel glad that at least I'm not like somebody who's made a plugin that relies on a meta boxes or something that's being affected. And so far as I can tell, the major developers of plugins like ACF are on board and working to be sure that there will be a smooth transition for everybody, and things will not break. But I think their business is being affected much more than mine is. For me, it's a matter of learning a different way to help clients do the same thing, which may actually turn out to be easier.
And a training piece, and that you have to, if you have a customer who's already updating and creating their own blog post, there's definitely going to be a training piece to that. We don't want them to wake up one morning and go, what the heck just happened, when they go to do their blog posts. So since we're on that piece, bring it home, Chris Badgett.
I do think that it is a planning issue. The enterprise does respond very differently. I think this is actually still very much early days in WordPress, even though it's 30% of the internet or whatever. Around my town, when I talk to people, a lot of people have no idea what WordPress is. And with any business, there's the early adopters and the innovators, and then it gets into the majority and stuff. So the way that early adopters and innovators behave is very different than the majority where the enterprise sits. The enterprise is much more risk averse. They want to do planning. It's the people who are just kind of throwing up sites or doing sites quickly. These are the innovators. It's great. It's a part of WordPress. But the enterprise has a totally different reaction. Like if I'm, for example, selling Lifter LMS to a startup expert, it happens very quickly. But sometimes I get on the phone with a university or a hospital. They'll bring like 7 people to the call. They'll send me like 300 row spreadsheets of requirements. The same product works, but it's just a different approach. And that's what it's like dealing with the enterprise. So they are, they're going to have a staging environment. They're going to test things. If there are issues, they're going to work out. So that's good. I do think that WordPress itself lost a little bit of control of the narrative, which created a lot of fear in the marketplace. And that's kind of a leadership issue or a communication issue, and that's a different conversation. But there's also a huge opportunity in all of this, which is there's a whole opportunity for business leadership, for agencies and product companies to step up and talk about Gutenberg compatibility, create business products and services to aid in the transition. If we think back to something like Y2K compatibility, it's the exact same thing. At that time, I was not into technology. I was on top of a giant boulder and Joshua tree, a totally different story. But the world was freaking out. This is like a much smaller version of this, but somebody could start something to help enterprise companies transition into Gutenberg smoothly and just be a part of that change management. It's a huge opportunity. So those are my thoughts.
Great thoughts from our round table. Before we go to our next story, I'd like to point out that our sponsor for this week is Intelligence WP. They are a plugin company that helps you actually make sense, a lot more real sense of what's going on with your Google Analytics. So as opposed to just seeing a few numbers, you can dig down to really see what's performing well and how to use it for improving your site. You can find them at intelligencewp.com. Let's go on to our next story. All right, so we've talked about Gutenberg in the enterprise. Now, our next story talked about the theme. It was from the theme review team and looking at Gutenberg. And the article was interesting, but we thought the comments and some of the communication and discussion that came around this really was interesting. And so, Sallie, I'm going to have you start us off with this one, please.
Okay, so I came across this yesterday, and let me just pull that up here, and read through it. And it's basically about, should we allow we being the theme review team, in terms of the guidelines for what's acceptable in the WordPress repo, should we allow themes to include custom blocks? And most people in the comments were arguing, no, this leads to various kinds of problems, and a lot of what the blocks do ought to be handled in plugins. There was one person arguing really vociferous, somebody from a theme company arguing really vociferously for allowing themes to include custom blocks. And it seems in a way to be going back to the issue of things like theme dependent shortcodes for displaying things. In a lot of ways, blocks are meant to replace shortcodes with something that is more comprehensible, so that, because you paste a shortcode into your editor and it's just this like line of code and it's not very meaningless. And as we've all seen websites where they were substantially built out of shortcodes, and then you turned off whatever created the shortcodes, and then there was just this complete mess left. And so there's certainly been a push to keep things that generate shortcodes in plugins. It seems to me it makes sense to keep the blocks in plugins, but then there's this sort of like, well, how many types of blocks might there be? We're not sure at this point how many will be included in core, but there will be a number of them. And there are already people creating plugins that make custom blocks and so on. And somebody said that the thing that I felt I had to respond to was basically, if we're not including custom blocks, where is the added value that we're providing for themes that themes provide, other than like, styling the default that's already there? So it says, yes, there will be no real value proposition for visitors, meaning I think people looking at themes, apart from different styles for the same blocks. And my response was basically, so how is that different from what we have now? WordPress comes with certain built-in widgets, certain built-in templates, and your theme creates styles for that. And people who make themes also often now create styles for, say, WooCommerce, because that's so popular. Or for, there are themes that advertise that they have styles for, Lifter LMS or the events calendar or Instagram, whatever plugin, and certain kinds of things. And eventually, it won't happen immediately, but eventually there are going to be certain people who make custom block plugins, and I'm guessing the page building companies will probably have a head start on this, whose plugins for custom blocks are super popular and used by hundreds of thousands of sites. And it will make perfect sense for theme developers to write their own styles for those blocks, rather than creating their own blocks and then running into the issues of content loss, or at least loss of specific functionality assigned with things. So I think it's just, again, well, we're facing something of a transitional period, but we have been through this before with WordPress. Widgets have been introduced. Custom menus have been introduced. Custom post types have been introduced. Post formats were introduced. And, for a little while, people did create, custom post format styles in their themes, until post formats just turned out not to be very popular, and that went away. And I think that as a theme developer, focusing on, presentation of stuff that's either produced by core or by plugins is the way to go, versus, introducing separate things. And, obviously there's a whole bunch of theme developers out there who don't feel that way because they, sell themes with bundled plugins in them, but those have never been in the repo.
Very good point. And Chris, since you mentioned that, the styling of specific options, like the style of themes for Lifter LMS, are really important, because people do want to have that specific look and feel. So if your comments on this, please.
I think it goes back to my previous comment about losing control of the narrative a little bit. Mm-hmm. Part of leadership is getting a core common language going. So we have all these things. We have widgets, we have plugins, we have themes, we have page builders, we have core, we have shortcodes, and now we have blocks. So are blocks meant to replace something? Are they a new tool? Are they making something else sunset? So part of it for me is I'm still trying to figure out, are we in a group conversation around, is every option on the table and the WordPress community is brainstorming? Or do we have a communication issue about what blocks are supposed to do? Because I just see a lot of confusion out there. At the end of the day, I know Gutenberg has good intentions, but even me, like, I need some help understanding. I need to get on to speed with the language and what's intended to go where. You know, I see Beaver Builder as an example of release, you know, doing Gutenberg stuff. Like, I think we just need more conversation just to understand these fundamental words. Is something going away, or is something replacing something, or is this a new tool set?
Good point. And I think some of it, like you said, Sallie, is some of this theme stuff has been a battle with, WordPress has been pretty clear with what they think themes should be. But that doesn't mean that some of these developers have treated that way. And, you know, whether they're bundling plugins or actually some not even bundling plugins, but for example, Chris, you've seen this, I'm sure, there are a few, quote, LMS themes that build the whole functionality of the LMS within the theme. Yeah. And that's well defined as not to what themes are supposed to be within WordPress. And of course, as you pointed out, Sallie, they are not in the repository. So, John or Mendel, you want to jump into this one?
Oh, I'm raring to go, but John, you can do it.
No, go ahead. You got first.
I'm pretty passionate about this stuff. I don't think it should be called Gutenberg. I don't think it ever should have been called Gutenberg. I don't think it should have had a name. This entire conversation is really about Gutenberg and not necessarily about these articles. But I will say the article that we're talking about, like, it was great, right? Like, it's awesome that a new compatibility checker was, or compatibility repository was created. I think the comments are like all internet troll comments. Like, they're not they're a little listen, some of them are a little rude, and I just don't like, there's not a big place in my heart for like rude like inflammatory comments, especially when it comes to something as trivial as software. Like, it just, like, I don't know. I just think it's a little obnoxious. I don't think people are looking with a positive attitude towards this project. I think they're looking at it with a negative attitude. I think that's being perpetuated by a lot of other people that are saying negative things, and then it's creating this negative aura around it. That said, like the repository for compatibility checking is awesome. Crowdsourcing it is awesome, but it shouldn't have been called Gutenberg. We shouldn't have called it that because Gutenberg and the idea behind the name created a way of thinking about the software that's or this change that's inherently negative or monumental. If we just called it an editor upgrade, I don't know that we would have had any cycles around these conversations. So I don't know. Again, my non-popular view on the subject. I hope, by the way, that like people don't start trolling me on I hope the WordPress community doesn't like, hey, we're gonna come after Mendel now. But yeah.
John Locke, jump on in.
No, I'm not gonna jump on him. I think
jump on in, not on him.
Oh,
Yeah, no.
Come on, John. Come on.
beat down.
Take the gloves off.
Nah, man. I just, yeah, from what I see in this comment section, I think it's just the theme review team is trying to figure out like what the rules are that apply to blocks. Because I think for the components of the themes, they have like certain rules, like what can be included in a theme on the repo and whatnot. And they're trying to figure out where blocks like falls in that. So that's just what I'm seeing. So
there's a lot to still be defined, I think, is what's going on there.
That's basically it.
And let's go ahead, wrap this one up and go to our break. It's yet another exciting conversation with our roundtable. We're going to go for our break now, folks. Welcome back, everybody, to the WP-Tonic roundtable. And Mendel, you never have to apologize for your opinions on this show.
God knows none of the rest of us do.
Exactly. That's what we're here for. Popular or not, we're here to talk about what's fun and interesting in the WordPress world and online. Before we go to our next story, I just have a quick question for the group that because I do have some experts on here, I'd love to know if anyone else gets these. I've started getting these weird emails from people asking me for quotes on websites. Now remember, folks, I don't develop for people anymore. So I don't know where they're finding me. And they write these messages that sound very much like they're coming from offshore. They sound very spammy with a lot of links. If this is my client and she needs a website, and can you please look through these pages and give me a quote? And I've been getting a lot of them. Is this like the new link bait kind of thing to drive traffic from spam emails? Is anyone getting that?
I have not gotten those. I've gotten an increasing number of like feature our article on your website or write guest blog posts or things like that. But I have not gotten, random inquiries about building websites.
I'll stop sending them. I
Thank you, Mendel.
Queued up, but yeah, I'll stop sending them to you.
Okay. That was just strange. And sending me to the specific pages. So I thought, is like this a new way to start, if you're sending spam emails, trying to drive traffic to a site?
It could be. Have you followed any of these links and where did they go?
Only one. It actually went to this person's real website, and they were asking me, like, how much would you charge to change it here and there? And I wrote them back. I said, I don't do websites. I'm sorry.
I will say that some, I see on occasion people from like Pakistan or India, places like that, that are kind of in some ways disconnected from the rest of the WordPress community, or not as connected. They'll send me requests and then they'll ask me random questions. And at first I thought it was spam. It's actually people that find your personality out there somewhere, and they're like, hey, I got a question. This person's an expert in this WordPress thing, and like they just reach out. So I don't know, maybe it's genuine, right? Because I get random I accept like most friend requests from people on Facebook now, because I realize that like there are a lot of people in the WordPress world, because there are a lot of people that are just reaching out randomly and they're like, I've seen you before. I don't know how to do business. I'm graduating college. What do I do? So
interesting. Well, I stopped doing the Facebook thing after I kept getting date offers. And I was like, no, please. But it was written in such a way that maybe that is it, because you could tell, or it sounded like it was offshore, which is what made me, I didn't even like forward it, Sallie, to say, well, my friend Sallie develops websites, or I wasn't sending it to John or anybody, because it was like so weird looking. I thought, they'll be hating me because it's somebody spamming them. So I thought I would ask that before we go back to our other article. And yes, we seem to be on a Gutenberg trend today. And that's that 4,500 plugins need our help determining Gutenberg compatibility. John, we talked a little bit about this before everybody else jumped in, so I'd like your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, the main strength and perhaps the biggest strength and biggest weakness of the WordPress ecosystem is the plugin repo. My main concern with the sites that I build for clients are, do certain plugins work with Gutenberg, like ACF and Gravity Forms and other ones like that. But there are a lot of plugins in the repo that haven't been tested. So if this project is going to succeed, then they need to know what plugins are actually going to be compatible with Gutenberg or not. One of the things, and that is a weakness of the plugin repo, is, and I think that they're taking steps to kind of fix this, is there are a lot of like plugins that aren't actively maintained anymore for whatever reason, like the original developer, maybe they just are doing other things, or they just don't have the time or resources to do it. Obviously not with the top like popular plugins, but more ones that are kind of in the 1,000 to 2,000 install range, and so I think that is a concern. I think this is a good effort by the community to at least say like, hey, we've checked this one, it works. We've checked this one, it doesn't work. And I think that's a thing that the plugin repo, they are continuing to improve, because I think they are kind of flagging ones that aren't being maintained anymore at this point anyway. So yeah, that's what's going on. So
Mendel, I agree with you. I hate seeing the negativity in some of the comments, but then if you've followed the Tavern for very long, you've seen that did not just start with Gutenberg. That's been kind of every time something happens with WordPress that a group doesn't like, things seem to get pretty nasty. So being though that so many people are taking the negative, do you think this request to help with the testing is a place where we're going to come together as a community, or is it just going to be fodder for some of the trolls?
No, we're not going to cut. Well, it's going to be like open source. Usually, it's going to be a small group of people doing most of the work, and I think that people will. I think there will be some people out there that will be kind and help out. I think most people will be, checking their own plugins and making sure the accurate classification is in there for their plugins. I think that we'll come together as much as we have in the past, or as much as an open source community does. But as far as knocking out 500,000 plugins or what is it, 50,000 plugins, whatever it said in that article, like people aren't in a hurry to, again, the negativity around this project. People aren't in a hurry to help out on something that has been branded from the start a rebellious underdog of a change that is going to massively disrupt business and small commerce and things like that. So I don't think people are going to be in a hurry to work on it. They're actively kind of giving it the middle finger, right? It's hard to do that and also help out with it at the same time. I'll probably pop on there and review plugins that are on my personal site, right? And maybe I'll test a couple other ones. It's also kind of difficult, right? So the barrier to entry there is kind of high, because you have to have a sense that you're an expert. You have to have an install. You have to then go install plugins. You have to find plugins that haven't been reviewed yet. Then you have to head over to that site and review, right? And so I think there are a lot of things involved in it. So it's lower barrier to entry than like contributing to core, but a higher barrier than just all my plugins work. It'd be cool if Gutenberg did some sort of like overlay or some sort of like indicator on each one of your plugin settings screens or something like that, where it just asks a simple question, have you seen any issues with this plugin and Gutenberg, right? And then we would start seeing like average polling and things like that from the community at large. I think that people would actually contribute to. So
I like that idea.
Mendel
And-
raises a good point about the difficulty of contributing. I mean, we've run a 3 or 4 contributor days now at our meetup, and what we've often found is that just for people to get set up to contribute takes like the first hour and a half if they haven't done it before, and it's kind of confusing. And in a way, our last one was probably the most successful because we were all testing Gutenberg on a test site that I'd already set up for everyone. And so the main thing was for people to get on the GitHub channel or the Slack channel to to make some comments. And I think, in some areas, I don't know if you can really erase the barrier to contributing, and in others, maybe it would be. I do think the people who complain and the people who contribute are not usually the same ones. So that, if you hear a complaint or a concern from somebody who really has done a lot of contributing and been heavily involved, that carries a lot more weight than, folks who just seem to like to whine. But, when I first saw this headline, I thought, didn't they miss a decimal place? Because they're talking about basically the top 4,500, 5,000 plugins. There are something like 50,000 plugins in the repo, and they are not suggesting that we attempt to to test all of them, the ones that have 10 installs or whatever, but the ones that a substantial number of the community uses will need testing. And I think most of those plugins will be tested or at least I'd say the top 100 or so will be tested by the folks who develop them, but in some cases there are going to be plugins where it needs testing, and external testing is usually helpful because sometimes the person who builds something knows how to use it and doesn't necessarily know how somebody who doesn't know how to use it is going to interact with it.
Absolutely. And because of that, in a minute, I want to go over to Chris because you are our plugin developer. So I know you're having to do this testing. I think the other reason that makes testing challenging and still needing external is sometimes it's not specifically this plugin working with this, but other plugins that might be installed. None of us have the exact same installation. And so, Chris, I know you have a plugin and it integrates with other plugins like bbPress. So it's even a bigger picture, isn't it, than my plugin and Gutenberg?
Absolutely. There's a lot of different configurations that people have. And to John's point earlier, the strength of WordPress and its growth and adoption is the plugin community, in my opinion. And I like Mendel's tip on having something on this plugin settings screen if somebody has Gutenberg installed. I think that where it might ask a question or whatever, I think what we're missing here is a little bit more of a proactive approach to getting ready for Gutenberg. And this is a great step, what this person is doing with crowdsourcing the testing. But I think that it could be even better in terms of if we are again, author, contributor, or whatever. And I think a lot of the fear around the issue is this whole issue of compatibility. And when I'm not sure where the conversation emerged, it'd be interesting to trace it back. But the idea of like a WordPress classic versus Gutenberg moving forward or whatever, and there's going to be a break, that's what scares people. And so if that conversation around classic, this open source software tool has always been backwards compatible, but there is in fact going to be a break here, that's sort of what creates all this fear. But that's something you can really get in front of with some proactive leadership around testing. And of course, a lot of the WordPress community stuff is free and community driven. we've had Gutenberg installed for a long time, and we're testing it. And it's changed how we think about future product roadmap, which is awesome. And we're doing it on our own. And it's not that we don't expect too much, because we get so much benefit for free from the WordPress community. But we're doing our part. But I think there is more that could be done at a core level around just the WordPress leadership and being a little bit more proactive around compatibility.
Excellent. Thank you. We went really long on last week's show, so we're coming up on a 50-minute show. I'm going to tie it up a little early this week because I think people were going to sleep last week, at least you guys who were being interviewed. I can see your faces as I was in Facebook. So we're going to wrap it up. We will go the opposite direction to tell us where they can find you. John Locke.
You can find me at my website, which is Lockdown Design. On Twitter, I'm Lockdown_, Facebook and LinkedIn. Just look for Lockdown Design.
Thank you. Mendel.
Hi. Hit me up at If You Will It, on Twitter, on Facebook, you could Skype me, but I don't turn on Skype. Oh, and head over to GoDaddy.com/pro if you're interested in the stuff that I am looking at and playing with and helping out with at GoDaddy. It's cool stuff. So,
thank you, Chris.
You can find me at lifterlms.com. Also on my podcast called LMS Cast, and I'm always experimenting and trying new things. One of the things I like to do is do the opposite of what a lot of people are doing. And one of that is just to test ideas. And one of the things I'm doing is I put a link on my Twitter profile if you want to schedule a 15-minute call with me. I'm not making it difficult to get in touch with me. It's at Chris Badgett. And if anybody watching this wants to chat, I'd love to connect and see how we might collaborate.
Thank you for that. Sallie?
You can find me at WPFangirl.com. The meetup is at eastbaywp.com. I am at Sallie Goestch on Twitter, and if you can spell my name, you will find me. I am unique in Google.
Thank you. And I'm Kim Shivler, sitting in for Jonathan Denwood. You can find Jonathan at WP-Tonic.com, and you can find me at KimShivler.com. Join us next Wednesday as we interview someone interesting in the WordPress community, and next Friday as our roundtable gets back together to discuss whatever the news is the next week. Bye, everybody.